such hatred. The force of the attack was so immense that during or after these assaults, as a result of the injuries these women suffered, 5 of them died. Welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. Exactly a week ago, that is on April 28th, last Tuesday, after many years behind bars, Henryk Łomiarz was released from prison. That was his nickname, Łomiarz. We're making this episode, I'd say, kind of quickly for that very reason, because he holds, I'd say, an important place. In this field of criminology we've been talking about for the past few years, there was practically no case, especially cases related to attacks, to what's happening in Warsaw, to crime in Warsaw. Someone would always mention him. He was born in 1962, he's 64 years old, and he spent most of his life, over 30 years, in prison. When he was just 15 years old, he already committed his first crimes, so the number of years he spent behind bars is actually much higher. But basically, everything he did as an adult, starting from around the age of 20, in his life is connected to the fact that he attacked women. As he said, he hates women. When he sees a woman, he thinks about eliminating her. As we can see from this, he's really a dangerous man, but he also attacked women and also robbed them. Usually, it came down to stealing things that the woman had with her, and since those were times when women usually carried purses, in fact, they were killed. He most often took those purses. He had the nickname Łomiarz. That was the name basically given to him by journalists. It was never confirmed that he used a crowbar, and in fact it's rather unlikely that he actually used a crowbar for those robberies. It was more like a spring from a sofa bed. Back in the day, beds or sofa beds used to have those kinds of springs. They were quite handy and popular, or perhaps it was some kind of pipe that he used to beat the women he attacked. As I said, the nickname was good because it made, I would say, an impression on one hand. Well, the term Łomiarz sounds not very serious, but on the other hand, it still inspires fear. It's a bit like those who use, for example, Santa Claus masks for bank robberies. So the name caught on. And in fact, those first robberies started in 1992. Exactly on March 23, 1992, on Nowowiejska Street in Warsaw. An elderly lady is walking down that street. It's March, so the days are short. It's already dusk. Suddenly, she gets a powerful blow to the head. She didn't see where the attacker came from or from which direction. She was simply knocked out and her purse was taken. Well, that was the first, I would say, historic attack. The next ones happened a few months later, always following the same scenario. There were always places that were kind of secluded, often tenement building entryways. Besides, he wasn't just called Łomiarz, but also the madman with the crowbar or the gateway vampire. Those were the kinds of nicknames people used back then, because after all, nobody knew who this man was yet. They happened according to the same scenario. A woman walks down the street, enters a building entryway, suddenly gets hit hard, and usually her purse is taken, even though there are a lot of these attacks. At first, the police didn't really connect these attacks, but they didn't connect them. Probably so as not to cause any panic here, so that people simply wouldn't be afraid, because that's an extra burden after all. When the press finds out about it, people find out too. Well, that's pressure on the police, so naturally at first the police say they don't know if it's the same man or if these attacks are connected. but it was obvious right away from the way he operated that it was the same men. And despite the fact that there were almost 30 attacks, exactly 29, basically there was nothing. No information whatsoever about who this bandit was, acting with such cruelty. And it wasn't just the attacks, because it turned out that the hatred, the force of the blows was so immense that during or after these attacks, as a result of the injuries these women suffered, 5 of them died. To put it bluntly, because of the attack, because of the blows, the women died. In fact, you could say they were murdered, so the case was becoming very serious. Here, to be honest, the police did what they could, but it seems there wasn't much they could do. This case, by the way, is also one where the police's incompetence was, I would say, significant. Because after all, more and more months are passing. Since March 1992, it's already 1993, over a year. The police have practically nothing. They don't know who this man is. They don't have any precise description. They're basically working blindly. The only clue, as it turned out, is that this bandit would arrive at the Warsaw-Śródmieście train station, take a route through Warsaw, and get on the Warsaw-Południe train. But that was the only thing they had. The police did try to watch the stations and even sent female officers, but it didn't help much. Probably also because of that, as I've mentioned several times, this was the early 1990s. We are in a time of such political transformation. Practically the old militia-era police force was basically gone because most of the officers either had to leave or wanted to leave. It's the early 1990s. Only the young police force remains, and they're not really able to handle it. Especially since in reality the focus of the police and all law enforcement is on the mafias. Because at that time the Pruszków mafia was running things in Poland, shootouts, bombings. Settling scores, paybacks, bodies are piling up everywhere. So naturally there was no one to handle cases like that, even serious ones like robberies. Or they were handled half-heartedly, just to get them over with. Because there simply weren't any professionals, and those who stayed had to deal with completely different matters. Well, that was the peak of everything that was happening back then. On June 14th, 1993, the bandit is in Warsaw again, committing another robbery. There were as many as 5 robberies in a row. People were calling the police constantly. Witnesses kept calling in. Ambulances were constantly responding to calls that someone had been attacked, usually a woman, of course. That day was even called the Day of Apocalypse in Warsaw, probably after the movie, which was already popular back then. But in reality, despite those 5 attacks, there was nothing again. Unfortunately, in the case of 2 ladies, 2 women who were attacked, it ended tragically because the women did not survive the attack. So as you can see, at that time this man was exceptionally brutal, attacking these women with a kind of rage and aggression, so they simply did not survive. Another thing is that, of course, usually the women who were attacked were already of an advanced age. Most often these were women over 70 years old, so probably their bodies were not as resilient either. And that's where these tragic cases came from. Nevertheless, 2 of these ladies did not survive that day, and again, there was nothing. There were conflicting descriptions. Each witness said something different, and the victims saw very little because the attack always followed the same scenario. So a woman is walking, suddenly gets hit on the head, loses consciousness, wakes up, but it's already over, and she didn't see anything. Besides, a few years later, the women who had been attacked talked about all of this. Among others, I remember a lady, a doctor from Warsaw. She said she was coming out of the gateway. She still saw that there were a lot of parked cars there. It was drizzling, and then she doesn't remember anything else, just a powerful blow to the head. Christina also recalls it with a bit of sarcasm. She was a long-time makeup artist at Polish television, and she says that the pattern was similar. However, she says that in all of this, well, she was also quite lucky because the doctor told her that if the blow had been a centimeter higher, she wouldn't have survived. And on the other hand, in some way, with a bit of sarcasm, as I said, she was glad that he hit her on the right side, because if he had hit her on the left side, then she wouldn't have been able to speak. There was real panic. Of course, when the news spread and journalists started writing about it, the whole of Warsaw, especially women, were scared. They were afraid to leave their homes, afraid to come back home alone after work. It also reminded me a bit of the atmosphere in Krakow when Karol Kot was on the loose. That young guy who attacked women, but he especially attacked in churches and used a knife. Well, back then in Krakow, women had, let's call them bulletproof vests. They would simply put pot lids on their backs, so that if they got stabbed, it would be a kind of bulletproof vest. But in Łomiarz's case, that wasn't possible anymore, because here the blows were delivered with great force, but to the head. Henryk was born in Konstancin, in the housing estate called Argentina. It was quite a shady crowd back then, a shady neighborhood. He was raised by his mother alone. He also had two older sisters. Probably because he was the youngest. He was his mother's favorite. She let him do anything. While his sister still had some responsibilities, he could do whatever he wanted, and he really did whatever he wanted. He wasn't interested in anything. Bruno Höst, our well-known and respected Polish criminologist, he said that his mother simply raised him to be an egocentric, an egoist, a selfish person. A man who believed that he deserved everything in life and he didn't have to give anything in return. Well, that's the kind of atmosphere little Henio grew up in. He wasn't eager to learn. He didn't want to study. School didn't interest him, so he had huge problems. But he wanted to have money, and already at the age of 14 or 15 he committed his first crimes. The first thefts. As a result, when he got caught, he ended up in a juvenile correctional facility. So that was his first contact with the law, in a way. Bruno Höst also said that he hates his mother, he hates women. Perhaps this aversion began right then. It did. Because he also felt some resentment toward his mother. In fact, later he completely broke off contact with her, and he no longer maintained any kind of contact with his mother. It's possible, of course, that his childhood and his relationship with his mother influenced what happened later in his life. There was one more thing that definitely hurt him in some way. It certainly also made him hate the world. He also hated women, girls, because he had a facial deformity. And that's why he was maliciously called Crooked Mouth. He must have gone through a lot because of it. It was definitely something that made him feel that no girl would ever want to go out with him. And that must have also influenced the fact that he simply hated women. Like I said, more months go by. It's already September 1993, a year and a half later. Henryk Łomiarz appears in Warsaw. He comes in from Konstancin and attacks women in Warsaw. September 6, 1993. He's in Warsaw again. He enters one of the stores. There he drinks beer and also buys sausages. The shopkeeper is watching him. He's a man who takes an interest in his customers, but he's also just that observant. And something struck him as odd, because he saw that this customer was taking money out of a woman's purse. That's why he remembered him. He took a good look at him. When this customer left, after some time he heard screams. He saw that two young guys were chasing that customer of his. He realized that it was probably some kind of robbery. He grabbed his phone and called the police. A patrol car arrived quickly. He got into the patrol car, and indeed, not far away after searching the area, he pointed out that client to the police officers. And kind of, no matter how you look at it, also by accident, not because of any police investigation, not because of evidence. Henryk Łomiarz was caught. What happened was that on that day he attacked two women. Earlier, as usual, he took the woman's purse. With that purse, he went to the store. He bought those sausages and beer from that shopkeeper. That's why the shopkeeper remembered him so well, and then he left the store. And he attacked another woman. Well, from a logical standpoint, it seems primitive. An action that, well, doesn't really show any signs of cunning, I would say. Nothing particularly logical about it. He went out, he saw a woman, and he decided to attack her again. All in all, as I said, there were about 30 attacks, exactly 29. That's how many were attributed to him. When all of this was put together as evidence, it turned out that there wasn't much to it. The police searched his house in Konstantin, but they didn't find much either. They found a calculator. It turned out that it seemed like the same kind of calculator had been stolen from one of the women who had been attacked earlier. Also, during another robbery, a plastic bag was secured that had fingerprints on it. It seems that at that time, Łomiarz probably had much more capable defense lawyers than those who were prosecuting him, because it turned out that out of the 3 robberies he was accused of, for which he was sentenced, initially he got 25 years, but 2 of the robberies were dropped. The robbery where the calculator was found was dropped. The defense lawyers said that obviously the calculator is there, but there could be more calculators like that. It's not certain that it's exactly the same calculator that was taken from the woman who was robbed. It was the same with the plastic bag. It's true that his fingerprints were on the plastic bag. That plastic bag, of course, belonged to the woman who was robbed, but when those fingerprints were left there, it's hard to say. That way, there was only one robbery left. That's the one from September 6th. There were witnesses there. There, clearly, he couldn't talk his way out of that robbery. Or explain it somehow. But in the end, the sentence was reduced from 25 years to 15 for one robbery. And that's the sentence that stood. Henryk Łomiarz himself had a rule that he never admitted to anything. He consistently, practically his whole life, said that he was framed, that he never attacked anyone. It's all the police is doing. They framed him for everything. And he's simply an innocent man. He had this rule, I think, that if they catch you by the hand, just say it isn't your hand. There's this gangster, or rather thief's maxim, and that's how it was in his case. In the end, he went to prison for 15 years. He served 14 years. He gets out in 2008. No. He probably forgot that during those 14 years, Polish reality has changed a bit. That this is no longer, I would say, the kind of Poland where there are no cameras, where there is no surveillance, especially in big towns. He goes to Piaseczno. He doesn't rob in Warsaw anymore. And in Piaseczno, he attacks another woman. Well, he lasted less than a year. It was all recorded. Like I said, he probably didn't know there were cameras there. The police came and took the recording. He already had a criminal record. He was in the police files, and he was a well-known figure, so they zeroed in on him right away. And indeed, it was clear as day. It showed that he was the one who attacked that woman. He got another sentence. This time it was 7 years. And again, he went to prison for those 7 years. So he gets out in 2016. This time he lasts for 28 days. He was practically in the prison in Łomiarz the whole time. So he didn't go far. After 28 days, he attacked another woman right there in Łomiarz. Fitting, isn't it? On Chemna Street. It was an elderly lady, 71 years old. First he kicked her in the head, and then, when she was lying down, he punched her in the face. As usual, he took her purse. There wasn't much in it. She had a phone, she had some bread, and only 6 zlotys, and I guess he forgot about that again. Even in Łomiarz, so to speak. There were surveillance cameras. It was recorded again. Once again, the police had no problems, because they saw that it was Henryk Łomiarz who attacked another woman. And another sentence. This time he got 10 years. And 10 years passed. As I told you at the beginning, last Tuesday, a week ago, after those 10 years, he got out of prison. Of course, here the court experts, they were considering whether to place him in a facility for so-called beasts in Gostynin, but the court decided that he cannot be placed there because, well, that so-called beasts law, it's worded in such a way that, in fact, the experts say that he might pose a threat. But if you look at it closely, the experts don't say that he definitely poses a threat. Since they don't state he definitely poses a threat, then there's no other option. He simply had to be released. And the moment Henryk Łomiarz was released from prison a week ago, I think everyone who is interested in this topic, who is in some way interested in what's happening, they are wondering whether Henryk Łomiarz will hold out. Will it be as he declares, that he has already left crime behind? He won't commit any more crimes. Or will he not be able to cope with his own personality, with his own psyche? And he'll attack someone again, of course, some woman. When the court released him, they gave him 2 conditions. First, he's under what's called electronic monitoring. So let's say every move he makes is recorded. You can react to his movements, but of course there's no 100% certainty about what he'll do or when. That's the first thing. And secondly, for him to undergo such therapy, which is meant to prevent his aggression, or such aversion, to put it mildly, especially towards women. On the other hand, the experts say that the rehabilitation that took place in prison did not bring any results. That Henryk Łomiarz is still Henryk Łomiarz. It seems that he still hates women. Well, the question remains, of course, whether he will decide to undergo such therapy himself. Of course. That's a huge question mark either way. He got out of prison, and right now he's staying somewhere. Well, we'll see how it all turns out. However, as I said, this is a matter that doesn't bring any special glory to the police. Because after all, for a year and a half in the capital of Poland, a bandit was on the loose who didn't really plan these robberies. These were, I would say, just ordinary primitive robberies. However, there was no information at all. I think so too, because that's how it was. Police statistics have their own rules. At that time, he was credited with 29 robberies in Warsaw. There wasn't any. No descriptions at all. So was it really him? He attacked 29 women, or were there other people involved? Other criminals, or maybe copycats? Of course, that can't be ruled out either, especially since the witnesses, they gave completely different suspect descriptions. But I think that since so much was attributed to him since he was caught, then later on all those crimes were all lumped together, just so they would be considered solved. I'm speaking from that point of view. You also have to look at the statistics with a bit of distance. Police officers know very well that these statistics can also vary. The case certainly doesn't bring any glory. Another thing, he was also quite lucky, because there was a situation like this. that when he attacked one of the women, he hid behind a car nearby. The owner of that car saw from the window that someone was hiding behind his car. He thought that the person either wanted to break into his car or steal it. He quickly ran downstairs before Henryk seemed to notice. The owner of the car simply knocked him out. So basically the ambulance or ambulances came for the lady who was attacked and for him who was lying not far behind the car. What's more, both of them, the woman he attacked and he himself, ended up in the same hospital. But before anyone realized it, he just came to, pulled himself together, and he escaped from that hospital before anyone realized what his real name is. Well, they just assumed that he left the hospital on his own or voluntarily. And that's it for today's episode. Like I said, we made it because of that. That a person was released from prison, someone who appears and keeps coming up in Polish criminalistics. Many textbooks describe his attacks. And there's this question mark. What will happen to Henryk Łomiarz? Łomiarz. Will he go back to prison or not? Well, if he does go back, then of course someone will unfortunately fall victim to him again. We'll see. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel. And as always, take care.
Do you like watching Kryminalny Patrol? Help us record new episodes. Support us through Hero and watch us without ads. Also, get access to additional materials unavailable anywhere else. Go to herohero.co Kryminalny Patrol. The link is also in the description below the video.